Welcome to the Black South podcast, South to America, where we reclaim the sacredness of the South, its stories, its people, its legacy. This podcast is inspired by Dr. Imani Perry's award-winning book, and we encourage you to pick up a copy. In Season 1, we're taking you to Durham, North Carolina, through the voices of community builders creating space for Black flourishing. Let's get into it.
Well, Breana, thank you so much for joining us on the South to America podcast.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to share and, like I said, to see y'all and your smiling faces today. So I'm glad to be here.
Breana, I feel like you're one of the, I maybe shouldn't say this right on a podcast, but it's just true. You're probably one of my favorite folks that we've connected with in Durham. I think that's because some of our shared history at Neighborhood Ministries when I worked in Phoenix. And so would love to hear about our connection and you sharing about Neighborhood Ministries and your time there, but then also would love to hear you go into who is Breana and your life story a little bit.
Yeah. So I was a first-year student at Duke Divinity School, 25, and I was learning about our field education experiences and the Center for Reconciliation. And so the Field Education Office and the Center for Reconciliation at Duke worked together for what was called, I think at the time, teaching communities. And they don't have the program anymore. My cohort was the last one, but we would be sent across the country or in different places around the country to special communities that were working on like homelessness or social justice or transforming congregations and really working on deep reconciliation work. And I don't mean the way the word has been abused, but like really like naming sites of pain and harm and working to fix that harm, to come together, to do listening, to take actions that are grassroots led, that really support that community's healing and growth and are not paternalistic and all of those things. And no community is perfect. But I was really intrigued by that idea. I had heard about assets-based community development from my my time as an undergraduate and my time in between when I was a teacher, as my denomination really likes assets-based community development and really likes John Perkins' work around that, even if they are not members of CCDA. They are really love it. So as a college student, we were visiting the Metanoia community in North Charleston. I got to see and learn about assets-based community development firsthand for like years in a row. So that really shaped, I think, how I engaged in community. I mean, I already engaged in a certain way because the way I grew up, which I'll go into in a minute. But so when I had a choice about where I wanted to have field education for my first placement, for my first summer at Duke, I told them I didn't want to go anywhere super hot.
And they said, okay.
So they said, well, what if we send you to Phoenix or to Houston? And I said, absolutely not. That I will feel like a lobster being steamed. And they were like, okay, well, we're going to work on this. Are you open to teaching communities? So I applied to the teaching communities, hoping I was going to get to spend the summer in Chicago. Wow. There was a really cool minister there that I wanted to work with and stuff. And I didn't, hot places were not places I wanted to go to. So then they sent me to Phoenix, which is the hottest place in the United States during the summer. And I went straight to the field ed office and I was like, what do you mean 126 degrees Fahrenheit?
Yeah.
And they were like, but it's not humid, Bree. You're like, we can only do so much. And you said not Houston. And I was like, okay, fine. It'll be fine. It's a desert. It'll be fine. And my mom grew up in a desert. It's great. And I have cousins in Phoenix. So I was like, this is exciting. I looked up more about Neighborhood Ministries. I think if I remember correctly, we had to have some kind of like call to interview. So I didn't talk to Kit. I think I talked to someone else. And Neighborhood was like, we want you. And they're very proud of their Duke students. And when I got there, I think people thought that I had like, that I was like this like privileged person who'd grown up with like no idea of poverty. And I was coming from this great institution, Duke, that's super wealthy. And I must have been surrounded by whiteness my whole life. And I was like, I quickly hung out with a couple of people who had been incarcerated. And personally, I grew up around gangs and stuff a lot. So I immediately gravitated towards people with face tattoos. I was like, these are going to be my friends. Yeah. And they were like, this child is going to die. So we became friends, and I did not die, but they became my friend because they were trying to protect me from myself. And then about an hour later, they realized that I spoke their language and I was going to be fine. So I'm sure they put word out in the community not to mess with me, and I'm grateful for that. And we had a really fun summer exchanging a bunch of stories and them testing like what ways I was hood and what ways I wasn't. And like many Duke students before me, I accidentally hit the van into something and caused a dent. So I have made my mark on neighborhood, and I was deeply mortified and apologetic. And I thought I almost made it. It was like my last 2 days, and I was backing the van into the cage, and I hit the fence post because I couldn't quite get the angle right. And they were like, you almost made it.
I think everyone has a driving experience and a story at Neighborhood Ministries.
But yeah, neighborhood was deeply impactful to my life now. And I learned so much there about myself and how to be in community in different ways, and Phoenix and neighborhood itself. And I deeply believe it is a spirit-led place that is just reflective of how God's kingdom can just be on this earth out of nothing but Kit's original grit and determination and open-mindedness, and the community's open-mindedness, and then everyone like working really hard together.
That's so well about it. Well, share with us more about you and your own story and how it led to the work that you do now.
So I'm a North Carolina native. I like to joke I'm like Indigenous native, and I was born here. So I tell people I'm from the swamps and the beach part of North Carolina, from the southeastern part. And some of my first memories are on the beach and all of that. But I have a unique story because in southeastern North Carolina, when I was a kid, you didn't have very many mixed race people. And both my parents are mixed race, and all of my grandparents are mixed race. So I always tell people I'm Cherokee, but I am Lumbee and Cherokee, which is an odd mix. Thanks, white supremacy. White and Indonesian. So and Dutch Indonesian. So I was raised by my mom, who's Dutch Indonesian. English is not my first language. English is my second language. Malay is my third language. Spanish is my fourth language. And I am not fluent in anything except English. I'm almost fluent in some of the others, but it's because my mom wanted to speak her native languages. My grandparents wanted to speak their native language with all of us growing up. But I grew up in partially in cities, partially in rural areas. Spent my summers in the Sierras with my grandparents, like 4 months out of the year. If I was not in school, I was in El Dorado County or Los Angeles. So I kind of grew up a little West Coast too. And in the South, if you're not from like one of the families that is one of the like oldest families in the area, or you're mixed race, or you're a person of color, but like you're not necessarily Black, you like end up on these like weird outside spaces. So I had friends, our community took care of us. I grew up in a lot of poverty with a single mom, in public housing. There was a lot of violence in the neighborhoods around us. My mom got redlined. She's a brown woman, and we always ended up in Black and brown neighborhoods. We always like got denied housing in other places. So it's always interesting. I grew up and I also was really grateful for how I grew up, because poor people take care of each other. Like we got each other's backs. Like I remember we had one canned good in our cabinet, and someone came to our door hungry, and we didn't even have bread. And my mom went and got that can of food and handed it to them.
Wow.
And then she said, sit down, we're going to play gin rummy. You know, God's got us.
Yeah.
And you know what? We didn't starve. So that was great. But yeah, our community takes care of each other. I was raised by aunties of every color. I was raised by grandmas and grandpas and like cousins, and everybody around was family, even if they weren't blood family. And so I grew up in this like really beautiful community. And even though we moved a lot, we still ended up with that community no matter where we went. And that also deeply shaped my life. And my mom comes from a communal culture, so that community is pretty easy for us. We get confused by other people not doing community well, but we're pretty good at forming community. Anyone who wants to join, and sharing and things like that. So my mom is very gregarious. She's makes friends wherever she goes, but she had a lot of health problems. So I had to take on a lot of responsibility as a kid. And also she sat me down, I think when I was like 8, looked me dead in my eyes and was like, you have to go to college. You don't have another option. And I was like, okay. And she was like, but I can't pay for it. So you have to stay on the straight and narrow so you can get a scholarship. So that's what I did. I worked really hard all through school, had a lot of help, a lot of mentors, and got a scholarship, decided to be an English teacher. I did that for a few years, was discerning while I was still in college that I wanted to go to seminary. And I had a whole faith crisis, I was like, my mom's faith was like really beautiful and inclusive, but everyone around me was like a fundamentalist who was always teaching that like God hated women, God hated anyone who wasn't basically a cis hetero white man, like all this stuff, like women shouldn't even speak in church. And I was just like, you know what? I'm not saying God doesn't exist, but I don't want to serve a God that's like that, and a God that only wants people to be in relationship out of fear, like fear of burning for eternity. Like that's not why you should be in relationship. That's abusive. So I was like, I reject this. Fortunately, my roommate in college was a pastor's daughter, and she'd grown up in a more inclusive kind of Christian church. And so she was like, hey, Bree. I was also raised partially Buddhist, so I had a lot of Buddhist philosophies and practices and traditional practices too from my cultures. But she was like, hey, Bree, why don't you come to church with me sometimes? Like, go wherever you want. You want to explore different religions, that's cool. But like, I think you should at least understand that Christians aren't all the same. And I was like, you have 2 months. I will come to church with you once or twice for 2 months, and we can talk about God. And beautiful thing that happened there, and this is actually tied to my call story, was that one of the minister's wives was sitting with me one day, and I had been going to like college taco Sundays and whatnot, and like actual street tacos. Praise the Lord. And I was like sitting with her one day, and she hands me a bunch of books, and she's like, I just had these in my house, and I thought you'd like to read them because you like to read. And I was like, thank you, ma'am. And she's like, I just wanted to let you know that when we're all struggling with our faith and we have doubts and we can't hold our faith right now, that's why we have the church. And I was like, oh, Lord, here we go. And she looked at me and she gave me a hug, and she goes, we hold your faith for you when you can't hold your faith onto yourself.
Wow.
And that plus I had a moment where I was with a youth group. I was helping chaperone a trip, and I was standing on a dock on an island where a bunch of people had died in a war. And I was literally screaming at God. And God reached down and was like, I love you, and you're one of mine, and keep seeking me, kind of thing. And like, that's like just the presence of God and understanding like God didn't embody hate was just transformative. And those two things are the reasons I'm a Christian still. And actually that plus I actually believe what Baptists believe, reasons why I'm a Baptist. But that relationship with that church that I was at, and the pastors there nurturing my like leadership skills and stuff, had me actually questioning, like, should I go to seminary? And I was like, I'm going to be a missionary to missionary. Somebody's got to take care of people who are out here taking care of everybody else. That's what I'm going to do. But I didn't know what a
Right.
spiritual director or anything like that was. I was like, all right. And then I was like, well, let me pray about this. So 3 years later, I'm visiting a friend in another country who's my mentor. And she'd been trying to get me to go to seminary for ages. And we just did ministry for 2 weeks. I visited her for 2.5 weeks. And we just did ministry. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, I'm with a bunch of people who are impoverished. We did ministry to everybody. And I learned a lot about the place where she was in and what her life was like. And for me, the part that cemented me going to seminary was experiencing doing ministry every single day. And like, that was the first time in my life that something clicked inside of me. And I felt like this was right. This is what I'm meant to do. Still didn't think I should be a pastor though. Got to Duke Divinity School after a long, arduous discernment process that involved harassing a lot of people with lots of questions. And was at a silent retreat. And I was sitting on a hill and I had what I call my Moses moment. Because I couldn't talk, God decided to. And I've decided since then, I should limit my silent retreats to never be at least 3 days long, to never really truly be a long time. I do spend a lot of time in silence, but I was like, no, I'm not ready for it. And my word for that year was obedience. So God really got me with that one and hit me with you're meant to be a pastor, Breana. And I was like, no, absolutely not. And by the end of that silent retreat, I had to go declare to the I think it was the academic programs office. I had to be like, okay, ordination track. What do I do? And my church supported me and gave me lots of opportunities to explore and all kinds of stuff. So that's how I kind of ended up in Durham doing ministry. I went to school here. I got hired by Duke Chapel for 5.5 years after I graduated. I was their community minister, which was incredible. We actually had, during COVID, we had Ricardo, when he was, I think still at Neighborhood Ministries, Ricardo Samudio, be one of our guest speakers to talk about community organizing and how to do like justice work in congregations and across like cultural barriers and language and things like that. So it's recorded on YouTube somewhere.
Nice.
Cool.
So now I'm at Durham Congregations in Action, working with 7 different religions and more than 50 congregations and doing pilgrimages for racial justice and all kinds of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. So good.
That's really cool.
There's so much there.
I know. I was like, what are you about to say?
No, I just
The
love
takeaway is I have really good food.
Yeah. From all these different cultures coming together.
Yes. The food is good.
I really appreciate, I've been thinking about this today because I had seminary class today and it's about African-American theology. And we were talking about womanist theology and how it emerged out of this need for the lack of Black women being acknowledged, right? And Black liberation theology. So there was this emergence that comes out of like a lack of space for all to flourish. And so then the other that's left out of the all starts to critique and examine and see that the good news that's being preached doesn't reach them. So it must not really be good news. And so it's like this whole journey, right? And I feel like I was listening to that in your own story of like, you're in search and in critique of good news that is actually for all. And I just think that's a beautiful part of your own journey.
Oh, thank you. I love womanism.
Yeah.
I was actually taught by Dr. Ebony Marshall Turman and got to meet people like Renita Weems and Ebony Towns because being at Duke, right, you get all these privileges. And I got to meet James Cone, like the father of Black liberation theology. What?
Right.
I read like all of that man's books, and just I couldn't even speak. I mean, I told him my name because I wanted him to sign my book, but I couldn't even speak. But I spent all day just listening to him and talking to my professor. And so, like, Dr. Marshall Turman, I have a question, and she's so patient with me. But yeah, like what a privilege it was, and learning about people like Dolores Williams, I think is my favorite because thinking about the substitution of Black women's bodies and the forced substitution and how that informs how we see atonement, like that healed something in me. And then I went back to my like church in Wilmington and talked to the missions pastor, who is just honestly has taught me so much about life and does so much, and he just does not get enough credit. But I sat and I was like, am I going to hell? Because I actually don't like atonement theory. Here's why. And he was like, keep exploring that because I'm with you on this one. And then Dr. Willie Jennings was my theology professor, and which remind me to tell y'all about that class one day. That was hilarious. But, we don't have time for that on the podcast, but Dr. Jennings always has a special place in my heart. But he talked to us a lot about, and we read Dolores Williams in his class. He talked a lot about systemic theologies and contextual theologies, but he didn't explain the differences to us. He didn't tell us which one was which. He just taught all theology is theology. And when he was doing that, he talked a lot about how we didn't necessarily need Jesus to die some horrible, violent death and be tortured for us to be, welcomed into the arms of God. Like Jesus's birth and life and ministry were just as important. God's incarnation was just as important.
Come on now.
And like Jesus would have died anyway, right? Like Jesus still would have died and ascended, like rose from the dead and ascended to the right hand of God, right? That wouldn't have changed. That was always the plan. But the seduction of violence, the seduction of power overcame the people. These are Dr. Jennings' words, right? Like he always makes that like he calls it the triune dance of God. He's like that rejection of the triune dance of God is what murdered Jesus. We also talked about the blood of Mary's womb and how it's not valued as being holy, but we value the blood of violence and torture as holy. And I was like, talk about it. And Dolores Williams also talks about that. So I just went off on a whole womanist tangent. But
that's so good.
Yes, womanism is amazing. And there's also like Asian feminist theologians and Latine theologians who have been like deeply influenced by their own experiences and by things like Black liberation theology and womanism, that like when we come together and share these experiences and share our theologies and things like that, and how like to quote Andrew Walls, serial Christianity is informed by our cultures and things like that, and our experiences with colonialism and stuff, we have this like beautiful amalgamation of like just God, like and liberation and ways that like we can care for each other and accept like more of who God is. And we don't have to accept the parts of Christianity that came with empire.
Yeah. Come on now. I know we're have a conversation with someone later today talking about just how much theology and the formation of your theology impacts your practice, and how all of that thinking impacts how you engage the world, engage society, and choose to be inclusive or exclusive at times. So that's so good.
Yeah, it's the deepest part of our beings. Everything is rooted in that. Everything that comes out of us is rooted in those beliefs. And so do we choose violent beliefs, or do we choose beliefs rooted in this accepting love that puts compassion first?
Yeah.
Come on now.
It's such a joy to have you on the show. We're not even done with the questions, but I'm so happy that we are interviewing you. A couple more questions. So one, I felt you were the perfect person to ask about the Indigenous history that lies in Durham. And you talked a little bit about your own connection to it, but if you could expound a little bit more on that.
Yeah. So, and for context for the podcast, I had the privilege of taking you both and a group of people around Stagville Plantation and talk a little bit about it. Was it 2 months ago? It feels like a long time ago, but it wasn't.
I want to say it was January.
Yeah. So that was like really amazing, because Stagville just lets us show up, and if you're Indigenous or you're descended from Stagville, they're just like, come on, use this space, and I really appreciate that. So I'm like I said, Lumbee and Cherokee, and our peoples don't historically get along very well because of federal recognition issues and just some various things that have been mishandled, I think, but it all comes from all of us wanting to survive and be accepted and you know, have rights, honestly. So this land I'm currently sitting on in Durham is the historic land stewarded by the Eno peoples, the Occaneechi peoples, Shakori peoples in some places, and the Lumbee peoples in some places. And I don't tell people that like this specific spot in Durham is my ancestral land. In Lumbee land, actually, like we moved quite a bit. So yeah. And also this, I've talked a little bit to some of the folks who are Occaneechi in this area who are still part of this land. And actually quite a few of us Lumbee live in Durham, but there's the Occaneechi band of the Saponi Nation is still in this area. They're like an hour outside of Durham. This is their historic lands. And they have told me before that at some point, like Durham wasn't necessarily like this area where Durham is, which is also a microclimate, wasn't necessarily occupied, but it was kind of like a shared space for things like trading or hunting. And people may occasionally have lived here, but it wasn't like a set, like this is where in North Carolina's indigenous peoples tended to have villages and towns. Like there wasn't a town here.
Yeah.
Like there's places in North Carolina named after the indigenous names for those spaces. But Durham was actually named after a dentist. So because of the railroad. So that's another story. But yeah, the big part about Durham's indigenous history here is that their we call it the Great Trading Path, came through here from, I'd say, about Burlington, North Carolina area, maybe a little further south, all the way up through Richmond, Virginia. And they call it the Great Trading Path because it was the largest trading route that was between the two parts of the Saponi Nation. So the Saponi Nation that was further north, and the Occaneechi band that was here. And parts in some other routes went into like South Carolina area. The land is currently called South Carolina to some of the folks there, but a lot of people used it, but it was the Occaneechi route. And what's important about that is it had several branches going in different directions. And so Stagville Plantation, which is the largest plantation in North Carolina, it spanned 50 square miles. So a good chunk of the Piedmont actually is connected to that plantation. And it was bought, a lot of land in Durham was bought along trading paths, along indigenous routes that already existed, where indigenous people already lived. Indigenous people here were removed, had to go hide in the hills, were killed, or were sent to residential schools, which some of the archives at Duke actually, I had to transcribe some of them. They were orphanages where indigenous people were sold to families as adoptions, and then they were servants. So they were basically enslaved up through, I think, the early 1900s, but the residential schools were active in the United States up into the 90s.
Wow.
So our Appalachians have a big history of the residential schools, like the education of Little Tree that took place in the mountains of North Carolina. But that was across the state. So I say all of that because these plantations were built along these trading routes. The roads were built along trading routes. I-85 is directly the path that the Occaneechi, the major Occaneechi trading route was. And part of that route also branched off and went through where the plantation is and goes east, right? I think I was able to show you all the spot in the woods where that path was. And it was the house was right there. And all those fields would have been right there. That's where they would have been picking up things for trade and selling crops and things like that to go into town was along that path. That road that goes past the plantation was part of that path. So when you're traveling through places like North Carolina that have a deep history like this, you're most often traveling in spaces where literally our ancestors traveled and had lives. Their spirits are still there. So there are we, the descendants, are still here. And I also want to say real quickly, the railroads were also put along those paths.
Hmm.
And the railroads in North Carolina were owned post Civil War when they were built. They were built by people who were formerly enslaved. North Carolina has a really strong porter tradition and really strong like railroad tradition. But the people who owned the railroads were the former enslavers.
Hmm.
So they took hold of all the shipping,
Hmm.
and they still had farming, and they still paid a pittance to the people who were on the railroads, which is why the unions were so important. But like my friend who is descended from Stagville showed me the exact spot that, like, I think it was like great grandparents or his grandparents literally built a railroad. Like, he took me to the spot. I've touched the beams that they nailed it to the ground.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
All that stuff is so recent.
Yeah. It's not as long ago as some people want to imagine that it is. But one question that we want to ask every person we interview moving forward, that I think what you've just named leads so nicely right into, is based upon everything you know, we think of you as a local historian, and everything that you do in the city of Durham. From your perspective, what do you feel that the city of Durham has to teach the rest of the country?
I would say a lot, and I would also say we have a lot to learn. I think that our community has a really strong sense, not of self in the sense of like provincialism, or, you know, like we do have a like strong identity, especially people who are native Durhamites. And I would always hesitate to call myself a local historian. Even though I kind of am, like, that's my job.
Yeah.
Because like I'm not from Durham, and for me, the local historians are all these people from Durham who share their stories, and I think of myself as like a trusted like vessel to help connect these people, or if the people have died or something, which is the case in some stories, I've been entrusted to pass on some of these stories to others. I've been bequeathed them, and they belong to the community. They don't belong to me. And I've shared as many of them as I can so other people can bequeath them. But Durham has a really strong sense of self and community, in the sense of like, this is our city, and we have a responsibility and an obligation to learn about where our city comes from and who we are as a city, and a responsibility to one another. And that comes out in a lot of ways. Like, people in this city care about each other, like really care about each other, and they will show up in droves if something is wrong and somebody has been harmed or something's not right. The one of the city staffers in Durham has told me before, when I first met her, she's amazing. She said something. I was like, oh, it's really great that you're out here like asking the public's opinion on these things, and like you came to the grocery store to ask. Like, we don't have to come to you. Like, you're out here. She's like, yeah. She's like, Durham is a spirited city, so we try to meet where you are.
Yeah.
I was like, I love that. We're creative. We've had mayoral forums, candidates running at like local breweries, where they like pitched a big tent outside and had like a DJ and had free apps from the brewery, and said, you know, like, come sit outside and we're gonna line up all these chairs and you can ask the mayor questions. We all decided to pay millions of dollars for our public library so that it would have spaces where people who are unhoused can like stay during the day. So yeah, in COVID, people were doing the best they could to help each other. And I think we can teach that because we know where we're from, and that helps inform where we're going. And I think if more people in this country understood that, and understood like we have an obligation to one another as human beings, but also because we share this space. It's a common space for all of us. And that's what I've heard from the elders here, is like, okay, you moved here, but like, you don't just get to consume here. You belong here too now. And you know, we belong to you and you belong to us. And this space is important, and location and context, which you probably heard from Reynolds a lot, matters. It matters a lot, and it shapes who you are. And you have a responsibility towards this city and towards your neighbors. And that is something I've consistently heard across Durham, and I firmly believe.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. That's so good. I think I mean, we talk a lot about our ancestral journey and ancestral story, and like there's a reflection of we're not just born into a vacuum, right? Like we're born into history, and we're born into people who came before us. And not only is that true in our own family lines, but that's true in the place and the land that we reside too, is that where our feet are stepping on have this long history into it. And I think what you named is, I found so true of Durham. Durham acknowledges that and then wrestles through it, and isn't afraid to wrestle through it.
Yeah, we're pretty loud about it. We're like, yeah, Durham has a messed up history and also a great history, like Black Wall Street. We're so proud of that.
Yeah.
And the people who are descended from the people who founded Black Wall Street still work at places like NCCU or in other places in Durham to like make Durham a city that is a city for everybody. And are still working hard on that. And it's beautiful to see.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much again for your time, Reverend Breana van Velzen. You are a wonderful human being and a great witness in the city of Durham. We just can't wait to come be there and live there permanently and be geographical neighbors and just do city work with you and serve the community and the city together. We really, really appreciate you.
Thanks, y'all. And I'm really, really excited for y'all to move here and get to see where Black South goes and what you all do here, and how your storytelling is part of this community now. And
appreciate it. All right. Thank you.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Black South podcast, South to America. Before we go, here's an excerpt from Imani Perry's book. I am American. That means something to me. Some common ground with others of this soil, even as the country feels irredeemably racist and maybe not worth saving. It is what Du Bois calls a two-ness, two warring souls, Black yet American. You face it in its most raw truth below the Mason-Dixon line. To be an American is to be infused with the plantation South, with its Black vernacular, its insurgency, and also its brutal masculinity, its worship of whiteness, its expulsion and its massacres, its self-defeating stinginess and unapologetic pride. If this speaks to you, grab a copy of her book and visit blksouth.org for more meaningful reflections. You can follow us on social media at blksouth. To help others find this podcast, leave a review, subscribe, share, and stay tuned for more stories from the South.